For a long time, this is how I understood TV episode structure. Half-hour comedies have 3 acts, or a teaser in 3 acts, or 3 acts and a kicker at the end. And hour-long dramas have 5 or 6 acts. The number of act breaks was set more or less by the number of commercial breaks, and the act's reason to exist was to make sure that you ended each one with something exciting to bring the audience back after the ads. Very functional. You gotta pay the bills. That doesn't tell you very much about how to write the story, though. But let's not pretend that we have no idea how to write a story. You have an innate sense of how a story goes. There's a beginning, a middle, and an end, of course, but it's also somewhat intuitive that the stakes of the story, whatever they are, should get higher as the story goes on. The problems should get bigger, or more pressing to solve, or the obstacles in the way should become larger. With these animal instincts and perhaps your favorite guru's guidebook, you shove off and try your best, and type, and say, gosh, I don't know, this DJ sucks, and type some more. And you sink or you swim, or more likely you kind of do both, just barely keeping your metaphorical mouth above the water while taking in a lot via the nose. That's Hollywood. Film critic Hulk is a lightly anonymous film critic / script doctor whose long-form essays on TV and movies have been instrumental in shaping my ability to understand why I like what I like. The first part of this video, this part right here, is largely me serving you choice snippets of his article, The Myth of 3-Act Structure, so that we're all on the same page and I can jump off his giant shoulders in the back half. Film critic Hulk is my William Shakespeare, and his William Shakespeare is William Shakespeare. Here's what I know about William Shakespeare. 1. Frilly neck thing. 2. Plays are kind of hard to read. 3. He's often depicted as having a droll little mouth. The defining feature of William's 5-act play structure is laid out by the Hulk as follows. Act 1. Introductions and establishing of pre-existing main conflict. Act 2. The conceit and putting your characters at odds with the pre-existing conflict. Act 3. The turning point. Act 4. The spiral. Act 5. Climax. Conclusion. Resolution. Okay, I don't think there's a better example to look at as we try and flesh out just what each of these acts entails than the example that Hulk uses in his article, William Shakespeare's most famous work, Romeo and Juliet. Here we go. Act 1. In Romeo and Juliet, the pre-existing central main conflict is that Montagues and Capulets f***ing hate each other. Notable introductions would be Romeo Montague and Juliet Capulet, both of whom are very wrapped up in their potential love lives. Hulk's explanation of Act 2 is just too useful, so I'm reading it in its entirety. Usually comprised of some kind of turn or reversal which challenge or deeply worsen the main conflict, usual in form of relationship development, reveal or surprise, i.e. star-crossed teenagers, Romeo and Juliet meet and go gaga over one another, which huge problem given the nature of the pre-existing conflict. Basically, this act feature the main development of the story, meaning if had to explain what the movie about, the conflict being described should be the thing happening somewhere in here. I think the most important things to pull from that is that the conceit deeply worsens the main conflict, and if you had to explain what the movie is about, the conflict being described should be the thing happening somewhere in here. If someone asked you, what's Romeo and Juliet about? You'd almost certainly say something like, 2 kids whose families hate each other fall in love. And those 2 kids fall in love in the 2nd act. It's the conceit of the whole play. Act 3, the turning point. What's a turning point? We turn to Hulk. A spurring action that makes the conflict infinitely more complicated. In Romeo and Juliet, it's Romeo's best friend Mercutio being killed by Juliet's cousin Tybalt, and then Romeo in turn killing Tybalt. It's hard to marry someone if your families are engaged in a generational blood feud, but it's really hard to marry someone if there's a blood feud and you publicly murdered their cousin. I'll say this for the 18th time, that you should really read the entirety of Hulk's article, but the most important insight he has into Act 3 is, I think, this. The real key with the 3rd act is to make the turning point one that is deeply affecting and to change the arc of the story. Romeo and Juliet were on one arc. How do we do our love when our families hate each other? After the turning point, they're on a different arc. How do we do our love now that I've been banished from the city for murdering your cousin? Act 4, the spiral. The spiral is actually full of decisions that cause characters sink towards the real climax, i.e. Romeo and Juliet decide to go on the lam, hatch plan to fake deaths, etc. In truth, this is the point where you really arranging and setting up the climax. But in that goal, it's important to remember that you must stay true to character arcs. It's really the best place to expose the deep character flaws that will either bring down the hero or allow them to succeed. Act 5, climax, conclusion, resolution. This is kind of pretty straightforward. We all know how shows end, happy or sad. Romeo and Juliet almost fake killing themselves, but then really killing themselves, and their families are really sad about it, and they call a truce. What does Hulk have to say about this? The most important thing, remember that it no just wrapping things up, but the encapsulation of the story, and should exhibit all the points one trying to make in the movie. The climax and resolution equals the goal of your movie. It should be the summation of everything you've written so far. It should not be a freaking afterthought. Okay. So obviously Romeo and Juliet, which was written in 5 acts, has 5 acts. Film critic Hulk's argument is that he believes that Shakespeare's 5-act structure is a much better way to think about writing a blockbuster feature film than the often cited 3-act structure popularized by Sid Field. What I say to you, here and now, in front of God's own T5 Canon Rebel DSLR, is that Shakespeare's 5-act structure is a great way to approach something as short as a 22-minute comedy pilot. Don't believe me? Good, this video could use attention. New Girl was a Zooey Deschanel vehicle and a Jake Johnson launching pad that premiered in September of 2011 and ran for 7 seasons until 2018. It had its ups and downs, like any show that runs so long, but in my wannabe professional opinion, it was often very, very funny and hella effective at being heartfelt as shit. The pilot is a masterpiece. And I have no idea if this is how they thought of it, but I think that the reason that it hits home so well and true emotionally is that it has the same Shakespearean 5-act structure. Let's take a look. Act 1. We open on Jess setting up her horror story about a girl who should have known better. Cut to 2 weeks ago, Jess is talking on the phone with her friend Cece. She's naked in the backseat of a cab, save for the trench coat she's wearing. She's on the way to surprise her boyfriend. She does that. She surprises her boyfriend with a dorky strip show, only to discover that he's cheating on her. She's home early from a thing, so he thought that she was going to be gone for longer. We hop back to present. Jess wraps up the story. This is why she needs a new apartment. Reveal? She's talking to Nick, Schmidt, and Coach, our 3 boys. Reveal? They were only asking her if she had pets. Act 1 is 4 scenes. It runs for 1 minute and 50 seconds. It uses a flashback to let us know what the pre-existing conflict is in the present day, which is that Jess has been broken up with recently, and so her life and heart has been rended into tiny little pieces. Opening credits. Act 2. Jess thinks their ad was written by a girl. Schmidt wrote it. He reacts by doing a douchebag thing, and he has to put money in the douchebag jar. Schmidt has an interesting dynamic with masculinity and femininity. Their place gets a lot of light, she says. Spencer hated light. We see she's still mourning. She still hurts. She's still stuck in the breakup. She's still stuck thinking about the man who broke her heart. Schmidt volunteers that Nick knows what she's going through because he got dumped. Nick denies this. Flashback. Nick and his ex Caroline. Nick's talking to her. We can't break up if I can't hear you. La 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 la. We hop back to the future. The future. We hop back to the past. Nick admits he was dumped. Tells everyone to get past it. It's clear that he's not past it though. They move to the kitchen. Jess declares her desire to move in. Nick points out that they barely know her. They want more info. She describes her quirky self, how she'll be watching a lot of Dirty Dancing because she's heartbroken, and that she's tired of living with her model because her model's friends are all models. That clinches it for Schmidt. He wants her in. The other guys, not so sure. They go to the bathroom to discuss. In their bathroom, which is clearly like a public bathroom, the boys argue over whether or not Jess should move in. Schmidt puts his foot down. It's a yes. Jess overhears through the door. She says, "You're not gonna regret this." Cut to the near future. Jess is bawling on the couch, watching Dirty Dancing. The boys look on in horror. Nick to Schmidt, "What have you done?" Act 2 is 6 scenes that come in at 3 minutes and 30 seconds. By the end of Act 2, we have the conceit of this episode. The boys have invited an emotionally devastated woman into their home who is killing the vibe because she is sad and not gonna hide it. They do not know what to do about this. Commercial break. Oh, now we get into the meaty 3rd act. Jess is on the couch, lying to her mom about watching Dirty Dancing while she's watching Dirty Dancing. Schmidt and Coach enter. Schmidt may need Nick to call call his ex Caroline to get them into the Wild West party on Saturday. Nick says no. They're in this situation because Schmidt okayed Jess to move in. It's been a week of this madness, establishing how long she's been crying on the couch. Coach says he's got it. He goes over there and tries to sort of like gruffly snap her out of it. She just cries harder. Coach panics. He tags Schmidt in. Schmidt says, let's all go out tonight. I'm gonna get you a rebound. Jess likes this. Jess sits up. There's hope. Evening now. Schmidt hounds Nick to call Caroline for these tickets. Nick refuses. Schmidt begs. This party is everything to him, he tells Nick. You have no idea what I'm going through at work. Flash cut to Schmidt's work. He's the only man at a workplace full of women. They mock him for being effeminate. In the bathroom, Schmidt explains the party makes him feel like a man. He dreams of motorboating a beautiful woman. Nick says he's not phoning her. Schmidt says he does it all the time though when he's drunk. Nick denies this. Cut to Nick definitely drunk, definitely phoning Caroline and leaving a message. Jess comes out of the shower in her tankini and suggests that Schmidt find a girl that he really cares about to motorboat. She doesn't know what motorboating means. At the bar, Schmidt preps Jess to go talk to a guy. She heads off, and he and Coach watch. Douchey Benjamin and Peter come to talk to Schmidt. Schmidt tries to downplay the party, but Benjamin sees through it and knows Schmidt doesn't have a ticket. Schmidt once again begs Nick to phone Caroline. Nick again refuses. Jess eats at the bar talking to Nick. They have a conversation where they lay out their romantic philosophies. Jess points out that Nick has no idea why he was dumped and doesn't seem to want to know. She says that people who keep it all inside live a life of regret. Jess doesn't care that her left boob is resting in a plate of chicken wings. This makes an impression on Nick. He picks up his phone as Jess is rizzed up by Peter. Schmidt and Coach watch Jess talk to Peter. Ben comes over and mocks Schmidt for not coming to the party. Nick interrupts. They are going to the party. He texted Caroline. Ben changes his tune. Ben says, see you there. Schmidt hugs Nick. Jess comes over with Peter. They're on for a date tomorrow. She told him she needed rebound sex and talked in small sentences. Nick looks a little concerned with her tactic to get this date, but Schmidt and Coach are proud. Act 3 is a meaty 11 scenes that run for 8 minutes and 1 second. The turning point is a spurring action that makes the conflict infinitely more complicated. Now, we have to translate a little bit from a Shakespearean tragedy to the first episode of New Girl. We're not going to have a spurring action that makes the conflict infinitely more complicated. But what we do have is an action that makes the conflict more complicated. Jess has landed the date. She started as someone who was very upset that her boyfriend had cheated on her. But she's landed this date by following Schmidt and Coach's advice, which is to talk in small sentences and basically try not to act like herself too much and also to very flagrantly offer sex to a douchebag. Hey, I said this next part bad, so I'm here from the future to say it good. Here's the turning point. Jess wanted to get a date. In order to do that, she took Coach and Schmidt's advice and she acted not like herself. Now the nature of the conflict and the story arc has been shifted. Before, it was, can heartbroken Jessica integrate with these hard boys? And now it's, can Jessica continue to not be herself? And if she needs to be someone else in order to get the date, is it really what she needs? Commercial break. Act 4. Cece squares off with the boys. They think she's crazy hot. She warns them if they hurt Jess, she'll crazy murder them. Schmidt's a douche, and she leaves to see what Jess is doing. Jess's room. Cece finds Jess on her back. She's fallen off her heels. She's freaking out. She doesn't think she can do it. She's afraid. Cece gives her a pep talk and fashion advice. Jess was gonna wear these overalls to do like a farmer's daughter thing. If not these overalls, what will I wear then? Living room. Jess emerges in Cece's dress. Everyone is stunned at the glow up. Nick asks if she's been texting Peter. She says yes. She wonders if that's bad. Nick says, no. That's nice. Jess is in high spirits. This, she believes, is gonna be great. Do we believe? Probably not. Outside of the party, they're trying to get in. They're telling the bouncer they're on the list. Nick finds his ex, Caroline. They joke about his prank calls. She asks if he wants to go get a drink. He's very down, but stops and says he has to ask her something. Why did you dump me? She's surprised by the question. Honestly, I didn't know you cared about me until we broke up. Nick accepts this maturely and they agree to get that drink. End of Act 4. That is the spiral. Now, this is where I would talk about what defines this act as the spiral. In this case, what are the decisions that we see being made that suck us inexorably towards the climax? But we don't know the climax yet, so we can't know what has sucked us there. So let's finish this puppy, and then we'll talk about the sucking afterwards. Ben and Peter walk up on Coach and Schmidt. Nick walks over. Where's Jess? Peter is grossed out. She was texting him like 7 times, long ones. He just wanted to hook up. Nick clarifies, did he tell Jess that he was no longer coming on the date? He's like, yeah, that's what I did. I told her. Peter and Benjamin walk off, truly cementing themselves as shitty people. Caroline gets Nick's attention, asks, aren't we gonna go get that drink? Nick says he has to go help a friend. Caroline is shocked. Schmidt is panicked. He contemplates an unfortunately costumed hot woman for a moment, and then goes after his friends. At the restaurant, Jess is being asked to give up the table when the boys arrive. Nick tells her that Peter is a jerk. Jess realizes that they left their party to come to be with her. She's touched and overwhelmed. She starts to bawl. Coach tries his stern stop it move again. That doesn't work. They're all very uncomfortable, as they have been all episode, with Jess's unbridled sadness. Nick starts to sing The Time of My Life from Dirty Dancing. Jess looks up, stunned. Nick cajoles the boys into joining him. They all sing terribly, but Jess laughs. Jess joins in. They all start to belt it. The restaurant looks on in horror. The server comes over and kicks them out. At home, Jess thanks them for coming to get her. Schmidt says, in a way that he means to be comforting and supportive, that he would totally do Jess. She accepts the compliment, but also calls for the douchebag jar. End of show. End of pilot. Act 4 is 4 scenes and 4 minutes and 19 seconds. Act 5 is 3 scenes at 3 minutes and 53 seconds. So now that we know the conclusion, let's hop back and look at the spiral. What got us here? Decision 1. Jess decides not to back out. This isn't the world's best storytelling decision to point at, because it's always easy to threaten to simply not do the next thing. You can always kind of like bail, especially in a show where they're not fighting to save the universe or whatever. She's just going to go on a date. So she always has the option of just not doing it. It's not the strongest, most compelling story beat, but it's a decision that she makes. It lets us see the dynamic between her and Cece, and it lets Cece have an influence on the episode. She's not doing nothing. She, at this key moment in the spiral, convinces Jess to keep going, to go on the date. We find out in the next scene that Jess has been texting Peter. Here we're seeing the decisions that she has made. To text a bunch, to be herself, to be a lot, to be too much, that are going to lead Peter to ghost her. And in terms of character development, the most important decision, I think, is Nick's decision to ask Caroline, why did we break up? We know previously from his conversation with Jess that he doesn't even know, and as Jess pointed out, was uninterested in knowing why it was that she broke up with him. So this is a decision that shows the evolution of his character. This is part of his arc for the episode and for the entire series. It's hard to imagine that if he hadn't asked that question, then moments later, when we find out that Peter has ditched Jess, would he have gone to help his friend? Or would he have just gone inside, the same man that he was before? The conclusion is nice, it's heartwarming, it's friends caring about each other, but as Hulk writes, the conclusion should be the encapsulation of the story. We don't just get a happy ending because the boys show Jess that they care by showing up at the restaurant instead of going to their party, but they embarrass themselves. They humiliate themselves. They do something that is, at least in 2011, maybe not the most typically masculine. They sing a song from Dirty Dancing in a crowded restaurant. And whether or not Nick, Schmidt, and Coach are stand-ins for all of men and Jessica is a stand-in for all of women, we can say that Jessica is very free with her emotions and the boys are very not. The boys are very concerned about the way in which they're perceived, and Jessica is far more willing to be herself regardless of the consequences. So the boys singing a song that's associated with a girly movie is them moving into a vulnerable space that we haven't seen them before in order to help their friend. And at the end, the last scene, they're all watching Dirty Dancing now. This space that has been Jessica's, where she loudly mourned her dead relationship, a space that the boys were terrified of, didn't know how to deal with, is now a space that they're all occupying together. And having all entered the same space, look at that, Jessica's not so sad anymore. And the boys are not so afraid. Frankly, a beautiful, all-encompassing resolution to what this episode has been about. And that's why the pilot of New Girl f***ing kicks ass. All right, let's do some fucking work. Okay, what I'm looking at here is a whole bunch of notes about what is potentially the pilot episode. Let's fly through them. Okay, so now we take those notes, and they're kind of all over the place. We're gonna start to put them more specifically into acts, yeah? So let's start at the start. Act 1, introductions and establishing of pre-existing central main conflict. Here's a funny thing. My first note kind of is at the start of the story, so to speak. Doug sneaks A1 out of the lab for the first time because Doug needs to prove to Min that he's a success. Okay, so you might imagine that the pre-existing main conflict based on this note is Doug's need to prove to Min that he's a success. But if I listen to myself, that's not the pre-existing main conflict here. What I think I've been saying is that the pre-existing main conflict is the fact that Doug has created artificial life, but it is not yet designated as such. And getting it designated as such by the people he needs to designate it, the mysterious figures shrouded in darkness above him, that's the conflict. So I think actually, based on that, the first thing that's going to happen in the pilot would be something like A1 emerges from a test of his sentience. He passed with flying colors, but the powers that be still want to see more out of him before they'll say he's sentient. So the first thing we see is this pre-existing conflict. The arm is doing good, and yet Doug and A1 can't seem to convert that to a, you did it. You create a life. You're God. So then there's going to be something like Doug has Kenny, his daughter, and during their father-daughter time, Doug finds out that Min is now engaged to her lame boyfriend, Lamo. I will not be bullied into deciding on a name for Lamo at this point in time. So, hold on. Even right here, I think we're in Act 2, because this right here is the first beat in taking us on our way to the conceit. Because the conceit of this episode is going to be, well, what would it be? What I was going to say is it's going to be Doug takes A1 out of the lab and is no longer able to put him back in. Doug takes A1 out of the lab to try to impress his... The conceit is Doug takes A1 out of the lab for the first time to try and impress his wife, but instead like fucks up his life. That's not a concise conceit, but ballpark here. This is early. Okay, so it's something like that. Kenny asks if Doug will be at her birthday, the next birthday tomorrow. He missed the last one. Doug says he'll for sure be at her birthday. Wink, ominous. Doug sneaks A1 out of the lab. Doug and A1 show up to the birthday. A1 does not go over well. Min makes her displeasure with Doug very clear. He has done the opposite of impressing her. Now here's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking about the fact that maybe Act 2 ends roughly on A1 though is so excited to have been outside the lab. Doug returns A1 to the lab, and the usually bubbly A1 is markedly sullen. Ballpark. Okay, the turning point. Now there are two things I think are really important, and I'm not sure if both of them happen in Act 3 or not. So here are the two things. A1 fails a test. A1 has never failed a test before. Up until now, the deal's been like, A1 performs very, very well in these, I think, mysterious tests that happen off screen that Doug doesn't get to see. He's always told that he's passed, but always also told that we need to see more. Now that A1's been shown the world outside, something has changed for A1. And broadly speaking, he's no longer happy with his life inside. And so he's no longer performing as well, whatever that means. And so it's important here that, well, maybe not here, but it's important that a change that takes place is that A1 fails the test. And what does that mean for what Doug has to do? What it means is Doug's gonna have to take A1 home a whole lot more, I think. Is that the turning point though? Or Min discovers that Kenny is obsessed with A1. Now this, I think, is also really important because Min has an established relationship with Doug. She is predisposed to not thinking very well of Doug. And Doug could kind of show her anything. Doug could invent fusion energy. I don't know, something cool. And she'd be like, I'm so sick of the way that you do things. I don't care what it is that you do. Because when you're doing them, what you're not doing is sort of like showing up and helping me parent our daughter. I think that Kenny being kind of obsessed with A1 and this, what I see is like a burgeoning, adorable friendship, is going to challenge Min's conception of what Doug is doing and has done, because she's going to be unable to not kind of start to see A1, Doug's creation that she dislikes, through her daughter's eyes, who sees A1 as like this super cool thing and maybe the only thing that she sort of like cares to spend a great deal of time with. I think one of those things is going to be the turning point. I wonder if we need A1 failing the test in Act 2. Because maybe A1 failing the test is the conceit. Maybe that's like one little arc. A1 passes test, gets taken out into a new place, learns just a little bit, and then fails the test. So we see that he's changing. And maybe that's what sets the story up. Maybe we want to go into Act 3 with Doug having to deal with that. I'm not sure yet. The spiral, we don't know the conclusion yet. So hard to talk about the spiral. Well, here's the thing. Actually, I kind of do know something about the conclusion. And this is, I don't know how you are, but what I love to do is to know a little bit about my story and then know like 3 things about the start of my story. And then suddenly get like a flash of what I think the ending will be and get really stuck on that ending. Be like, that's the ending. And then just like wrestle with how to get the story there. And here's what I'll say about this. That's fine, but a trap that I've fallen into many, many times is deciding on the ending, just sort of seeing it, oh, that's how it should end. And then not letting the story play out as it sort of needs to from the characters, because I'm like, I already know where this ends. And like, I don't know in how many books I've read of like, you can't lead the characters, you gotta let them lead you. So I have a flash of where this episode ends, and I'm probably wrong, and I'll probably have to let go of it as I figured this all out way more. But right now, I think it ends with Min telling Doug that he is indeed a great engineer, but that he's a really lousy father. I think that Doug wanted Min to say that you're a genius because that's what he wants people to tell him. And I think she gives that to him at the end of the episode. But I think she also says like, you're shit at what I need you to be, and you're shit at everything else. Okay, talking about the end, let's talk about the start. I think that Doug feels that along the way, Min lost faith in him. And Doug believes that Min divorced him, broke up with him, because she lost faith that he could accomplish what he had set out to accomplish. So he wants to prove to her that he's accomplished what he's accomplished. And I think that the fact that she's moving on is the precipitating factor why he has to go. Now is the time to do it. And even as I say that, I wonder about that as motivation. But early days, early days. And so I think at the end of the episode, and I don't know how yet, I have a bunch of ideas how, but we're not going to lay them out right now. Maybe, probably through Kenny, through A1 and Kenny's burgeoning connection, Doug has proved to Min, who was very skeptical about A1, probably skeptical that he was even sentient, that A1 is something special. And however it comes out, what sort of the message is at the end is Min saying, I didn't lose faith in you as an engineer. I lost faith in you as a man, as a husband, as a father. So I want Doug to get what he sensibly wanted, because he thought that Min had lost faith in him as an engineer, and also be delivered something very explicitly far more damning, which is that, no, what I lost faith in was sort of everything else. And that everything else, actually, in my mind, is so much more important than this one little identity that you hold so dear. And maybe that's not it. Again, it pops into your head, and I've got a bit more than this, but I don't have a lot more than this. And so that might have to go. That's okay. So that's what I got. That's what a start looks like. That's what my start looks like. Keep it the fuck up. Hey, if you've watched a few of these videos, you probably noticed that these guys have gone and turned into these guys. What happened there? Well, on an earlier video, I got a comment from user Brooklyn on Foot, aka Debbie. And she said, I'd love to help you design these characters. And I don't know, we're all just people on the internet, right? Like anyone could be anyone, and most things that people say might not mean anything. But I gave her my email. And you know what? She emailed me. And you know what? We chatted. And long story short, Debbie's character design fucking rules. I can't draw at all. Like, I have no visual arts ability. And so having someone come along and being like, hey, I'm quite good at a thing you are absolutely useless at, and I will help you with my skills to make a thing that you're making become a little more real, is fucking sick, I think, is sort of like the scientific technical term. Debbie's not even the first person to come along. Mildred drew the initial iteration of these drawings. My friend Larry drew the modified A1 when I realized that A1 was a big giant arm. 3 of my videos have been edited by my buddy Gabe, who just volunteered to do that because he could do it better than me.
Staring at the whiteboard, staring at the whiteboard. And now look at yourself in the mirror.
We just got to keep making them, I guess, because people keep helping me. And if you want to help, boy, oh boy, we got exactly 2 subscribers to the Patreon, which is huge. Which is huge. I'm going to be dumping tons of extra stuff that didn't make it in this video in there. A breakdown of an amazing TV show called You're the Worst. Their pilot rules. Its pilot rules. It's also 5 acts. I broke it down for this video. There's no room for it. There's 10 more minutes of me talking about the characters in the live work portion. We gotta chop it up. These things can't go on forever. They simply mustn't go on forever. So it's going in the Patreon. And I'm gonna throw a new voice note in there any day now. In fact, I've already got it. I just need to put it in. Hey, if you wanna help, check it out. Thanks.